Welcome back. I'm Edward Guerin, MFT, California license number MFC 27181, and I am a licensed family therapist, and some people call me Mr. Ed. And this is the third video, and we're going to talk a little bit about two of everyone's favorite topics: guilt and shame. See, I should feel shame because I can't even print this correctly. Now, what is the difference between guilt and shame? Anyone want to take a guess? Okay. Guilt says bad behavior. Or actions. You stole a newspaper off the neighbor's lawn. That's a terrible thing. You lied to your mother. That's a terrible thing. You should feel guilty. Shame says you're a bad person. You are a flawed being. Now, at the risk of being accused of all kinds of things, there are some significant cultural issues relating to these two things that, depending upon your family of origin, you were disciplined with one of these two paradigms. If your family was European, Northern European, Mediterranean, Eastern European, I don't know a lot about Africa, don't know a lot about India, but or Native American culture. But I do know European cultures. Most of them use guilt to punish and correct children. You did a bad thing. You hurt my feelings. You're, blah, blah, blah. Now, as I was explaining while we didn't have the recorder going, I do clinical supervision work for a mental health agency that deals with a Northern Asian community, and the reason I'm not naming the specific country is because Northern Asian culture is pretty generic, no matter whether you're in China, Japan, Korea, etc. It's all pretty much the same with regard to this, and all of those Northern Asian cultures are shame-based. And what shame says is, you are a bad person. You're basically flawed. You are a bad person. You have disappointed us, and you're a bad person because only bad people do the things that you did. And this is pervasive. What we have in the agency where I work is we have parents, we have mothers coming in sobbing because their biggest terror in life is that they're going to be an unworthy mother. And we have children coming in who get a low grade in school. The joke is, do you know what an Asian F is? An A minus, okay? Who come in with a bad grade and they're terrified because they don't want to be an unworthy child. And they brought home a bad grade, or the teacher wrote them up and said they were disobedient, okay? So, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, I'm from the rural South, and I have a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist who grew up in Mississippi, and he said it best, The Jews and the Asians have nothing on Southerners. Southern culture is both guilt and shame based. If your sainted grandmother had any idea that you had done that and disgraced our family name, she would be turning over in her grave right now. And you're like, but all I did was say a bad word in front of Aunt so-and-so. I mean, so this is the kind of stuff that's a part of how we rear children and a part of the way we put up expectations in society about how people are supposed to live and how we correct people's behavior when they do something that is not according to what we've said is good. Now, of course, we have all the legal stuff, you know, federal, state, county, and civic. And we have an attorney here who could probably talk about that extensively, but we'll pass a prosecuting attorney, no less. But we can talk about that a little later. But the point is, we all walk around with this stuff inside of us depending upon our cultural background. You know, I don't want to do anything bad. I don't want to hurt my family. I don't want to disgrace my family or insult their name or any of that sort of stuff, because we love the people that, you know, we love our family. That's why we call them our loved ones. We want their approval. We want to, etc. Well, then what happens if we either are or do something that goes against all the rules that are underpinned by this? For example, as I said earlier, I'm from the South. I'm also gay. For a long, long time, those two things didn't compute because there's a certain way that good Southerners were supposed to behave. I mean, and to give you some idea of how pervasive this is, before I figured out I was gay in my late teens and early 20s, I was convinced that I had never met another gay person, but if I did, they were from the North. We didn't have that kind of behavior in the South. No. That's something other people do, not people like us. See, this is how pervasive this stuff is. And it has to do with our formation when we're growing up and all the messages that we absorb as children and teenagers from the world around us. And I grew up in if any of you saw the movie The Help, that's sort of the world I grew up in. There's another movie called Cross Creek that's about Central Florida. Also, great movie, Mary Steenburgen, Peter Coyote. Very much about growing up in a rural southern community where everyone sort of feels like extended family, and there's a very strong code or sense of honor about how everyone is supposed to behave. And adhering to that is extremely important in that world. Still is, by the way. Still is. So, guilt and shame. Why is this one so much worse? Well, if I did something wrong, I could go apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I really didn't. Would you please accept my apology? I never want to do it again. I'm really sorry. This one, no forgiveness. There's a great scene. Well, there's actually several great scenes in the Joy Luck Club that illustrate this one. The movie The Joy Luck Club. One is where the young woman went off. She thought to play cards with another woman, and they drugged her, and then the guy rapes her, and then they send her back home pregnant, and her mother and her grandmother basically refused to let her come into the house. You've shamed the family forever. You don't belong to us anymore. Go. And they slammed the door shut. So, of course, then she has to go back to the man who raped her and that household and work as a servant girl because she has no other options, because she has shamed the family, and there is no forgiveness because you are a bad person, you're inherently flawed, and therefore you have no value. So this is a really awful place to be stuck. And every culture has things that will take you here. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go directly to shame lockup. And the list can be pretty long, but also pretty short. For example, it took us a long time in this culture for incest survivors to start talking about having been molested as children. Why? Because no matter what happened, somehow it had to have been their fault. That's the value we placed on incest and childhood rape and molestation. We still have a lot of that ghost lying around. There's still a lot of people who don't like to talk about really painful, awful stuff because they perceive that it brings shame on them. And it's very, very difficult, very difficult. And we contribute to that because we have a list of things that are not acceptable to talk about. Now, one of the things I love about living here in Southern California is that we tend to be a collection of people who've got tossed out of our families or the states or the places where we used to live because of these kinds of issues. So we're determined to come here and get free of this stuff and have a happier life. But if you go to other places and try to talk about all this stuff, people are like, oh, we don't talk about these kind of things here, boy. Why don't you go back to California where you came from? I made the mistake of moving to Oregon for 5 years. Some of the dirty little secrets. Portland is the child sex trafficking capital of the country, not adjusted for population. And it's not little brown and yellow girls from offshore, it's little white girls from Idaho and Montana and the Dakotas and Utah whose families kick them out and they get picked up, and next thing you know, they're in Portland working in a brothel somewhere. Okay? So when you talk about anything, oh, and the other thing about Portland, it's one of the incest capitals of the country. It was really kind of off the chart. So the net effect of that is if you try to talk about anything sexual in Portland in just sort of normal, healthy terms, lots of people freak out because they have secrets about sexuality relating to either themselves, their own family, and talking about anything sexual sends them right back to that place of deep shame and guilt. Similar to my mother's thing about her grandfather, he died of the flu epidemic of 1919. People do have the same reaction. I don't want to talk about anything related to that because it's painful for me and I don't know what to do with the pain, so shut the F up. I don't want to talk about it. And that brings me to one of the most important things about getting better, whatever that means. I'm a big fan of 12-step recovery programs, AA, NA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, Al-Anon, Readers Anonymous. One of the expressions they have in 12-step programs that's absolutely true. We are only as sick as our secrets. We are only as sick as our secrets. And if you're walking around with a lot of secrets, then life is a minefield because somebody might land on one of your secrets, and then what are you going to do? Where are you going to hide? What are you going to tell them? How are you going to wheedle out of it without feeling like somehow you've been caught and you're trapped, and now they're going to like strip you naked in front of the whole world to see, and they're going to find out your secret. That's one of the reasons why in therapy people generally have to learn that what's making them depressed or what's making them anxious is they're afraid that someone is going to discover their secret or their family secret, and and this was one of the big problems that I had with Portland, because up there everybody had a long list of we don't talk about these things. What? No, none of this exists. We don't talk about it. And of course, I'm sort of the poster boy of, but you need to talk about it. Why do you think you have the highest depression rates in the country? Because you're all walking around with all these secrets. It's not the rain, sorry. Because you could go right up to Tacoma, Washington, 50 miles up the road. They don't have all these statistics about depression because people in Tacoma come from everywhere because they're in the military. And they talk about stuff, like we Californians do. Okay? But the rule in Oregon is don't feel, don't talk about it, no matter what. And of course, we're only as sick as our secrets. So that's part of this process of getting well, is realizing that there's really nothing to be shameful about. There's nothing to feel guilty about, especially if it happened to you when you were a kid. And I'll wrap up with a story about my mother. My mother was an amazing woman. As I said earlier, she lived to be almost 98 years old. Her mother had 6 children by 6 different men. She grew up in an abandoned train station that they sharecropped to pay the rent and haul water from the neighbors. She got a scholarship to work her way through high school at the age of 15, and her mother disowned her for leaving home, and she graduated in a wonderful year for opportunity, 1931. But one of the things my mother lived with her entire life was the secret and the shame of being a bastard. Her father never married her mother. In fact, I don't even know if she ever saw her father. She really did not like to mention his name, because he was Edward Ramsay, R-A-M-S-A-Y. But for years, she thought, and so did her sisters, that they had kept the secret. That the next generation did not know, well, this is the secret. And of course, their mother was also born out of wedlock as well. So all of my mother's life, she had a certain reserve, and if there was any kind of social conversation going on, especially if the topic got a little uncomfortable outside the mainstream of, basic okay stuff, which evolved, like, oh, there's a war going on, oh, the war is over, oh, we're so happy, everybody's back home safe, oh, somebody died, it's really awful, somebody. But you would see her sitting there grinding her thumbs like this. Got footage of me grinding my thumbs, okay. And so, finally, of course, I'm the guy who, there were just all these pieces that didn't add up in my childhood. Why won't my mother talk about her father? How come none of her sisters, any of my aunts, ever talk about him? When I would ask them the story, they'd say, that's not the story, but you'll have to ask your mother. Well, how come I have to, how come you can't tell her? Well, no, it's personal between the two of you. And all I want to know is about my grandfather. What's the big deal, So finally, I did some research. I found out that they all had different fathers. That was the big secret. I didn't tell my mother right away because I knew that it would be hard for her. My father had just died. That's when I found out. But finally, around her 90th birthday, she was talking to me about how when she was a little girl, her mother would send her to get a switch, to be one of her other sisters, but that usually when she'd come back, she'd end up getting the beating. She was there, the other sisters weren't. And I said, well, maybe that had to do with her father. Because see, her father was the one who had money, and her mother hoped he was really going to leave his wife and marry her, or at least take better care of her. So she had a lot of resentments, plus my mother was very intelligent, and she figured out early on, man, nobody's ever going to take care of me, and as soon as I can get out of this place, I'm gone. As we'd say back home, I'm going to catch the first thing smoking and never look back, which is pretty much what she did. Well, for those of you who don't know, the first thing smoking usually refers to the train. So if it's a diesel bus, I guess that would do too. Anyway, so I finally told her, I said, Mama, I know the secret. What? What secret? What are you talking about? Well, I know about your father. What are you talking about? You know about my father? I told you, he died in the flip in 1919. I said, Mama, no, I know the real story. His name was Edward Ramsay, and he never married your mother, and, and your sisters all had different fathers. That's a lie! Who told you that? There's absolutely no truth in that at all. I can't believe you would even come up with something like that. And that went on for like a day. Well, then the next day, it was like, I want to know who told you. I want to know who the son of a bitch I can go kill him. Well, he's already dead, Mama. Sorry. I actually waited until the person who told me had died because he had made me promise that I would keep it a secret. So that went on for a day. Because my mother was wrestling with this guilt and this shame. She carried it her whole life. Finally, on the third day, she thought, well, it's true. In fact, we're all bastards. Even my mother was a bastard. And remember, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of grief and loss. And my mother had to grieve this big lie she had had to live her whole life, and the pain that went along with having to carry that lie. Okay? And the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So the first day I got the anger. The second, the first day I got the denial, excuse me. The first day I got the denial. The second day I got the anger. The third day I got the depression, the bargaining, the depression, and the acceptance. Pretty much all in the same package. Where she said, well, I'd still like to kill this son of a bitch who told me about it, but yeah, it's true, and I looked at her. We were living in California. She's originally from North Georgia, Toccoa, Stevens County, Oconee County, South Carolina, across the river. I said, Mama, it's 90 years later, 2,800 miles away. Everybody else is dead and nobody else gives a shit except you. And she kind of went like, oh, I guess you're right. Oh, okay. And this stopped and went away. It was amazing. It was literally like the second she said, oh, I guess you're right. I never thought about it that way before. Yeah, it's not that important anymore. Now then, that's an example of my mother, 90 years of carrying this secret, finally letting it go. And along with it, almost a third of her anxiety went with it, because she didn't have to carry the secret anymore. She didn't have to worry about being caught, about being trapped. And then what do I say? What do I do? So these two issues, the guilt and the shame, but particularly the shame, are life-altering. And they can really mess us up until we finally start talking about them. So we can take a break now, and we'll go to the next video shortly.